what kind of an economic system might there be in this new world that might emerge? And as you know quite well, Martin Armstrong, in his predictive model, says that the central banks will begin to fail soon, and that countries will begin to break up in 2026 or 2027, and that new countries will be formed, including countries that used to be called the United States of America. Now, this is a single scenario or a single possibility, but it is of such great magnitude that if something like this happened and you hadn't thought about it beforehand in some kind of a systematic way, the impact would be extraordinary, profound, highly disruptive. If that happened, would you pay your taxes if it was all coming apart? Would you send your money to Washington if it was all coming unglued? Would you even necessarily send your money to the state if it was coming unglued? How would the relationships between, and if there's no funding for the state or the federal government, then of course all of the usual kind of services that one presumes would attend and have attended these institutions for all of our lives would not happen. The police, you can everything that you can think about. And so Martin Armstrong says that these kind of things happen from 2025 to 2027, and my guess is that if it happens, it could very well happen in a hurry. It could be a matter of weeks, a couple or 3, 4 weeks or something like that. I mean, we're about to watch potentially the government of Canada to come down in literally a matter of weeks. But what we're talking about here is something different than just bringing down one government and then allowing the reformation of a new government. We're talking here about essentially the decomposition of the country. A large-scale uprising based upon a generalized sense of extraordinary betrayal. In fact, what we figure out, whether it's because of everything's getting cold and not warm, or the numbers of people who are dying from getting the COVID shots, or from the aliens showing up, or the banks failing, or the supply chains failing, or whatever it turns out to be, you get a cascading kind of rolling failure rate that goes into a sense of they've been lying to us all this time. And so then the question becomes, so if it's a short-term kind of punctuation in terms of the status quo, and it just opens up, that the government does not exist, then you get all this aberrant behavior that starts to show up immediately. Like I say, nobody pays their taxes. Nobody pays their credit card bills. It just all starts to cascade. And when it becomes clear that the government has failed and that there is not going to be a reconstitution in anything like what there was before, then all the jockeying starts. For those of us who see this whole thing in the way that we all do, it could have a very different kind of perspective and outlook. Because what you see is the breakup of the old system and the emergence of new ones, right? There is a new world, however you define world in kind of your regional or local terms. If it was a new country, that would be kind of like a new world. But there's a global new world that is coming together in a different way. Now, when I see that, when I think about that, I say, wait a second. Is this the beginning of 1,000 years of peace? Is this the mechanism that offers the kind of the architecture, the framework for redesigning this new world? So, if you're going to look downstream into this world and start into this new kind of configuration that might emerge, it would be worthwhile to try to think about what that might be, how that might work, how might that new world work, how would an economy work? Well, let me suggest to you it isn't capitalism. It isn't the system that we have right now, because the system we have right now is the thing that has literally produced the biggest problems that we have on the planet. They're direct derivatives of the structural aspects of the system that we all participate in, that supports the movement of value across areas and across people. Because the capitalistic system has generated extraordinary income diversity. I mean, it's a direct derivative of the structural aspect of it. It's an environment where competition drives everything, not cooperation. It's not there's no value on their balance sheet of your company for how well you get along with other people. And it's certainly not, it's focused on individuals, owners and investors, not the community. That's not a balance sheet element. It's not altruistic by nature. The objective is to accumulate as much money as possible for the stakeholders. It is behind all of the huge ecological problems we have because the ecology is not on your balance sheet. It's not one of the things that is valued as part of the system. The system values money, which is another a fundamental issue here. The capitalistic system is designed to where there is a small number of investors or bankers that control essentially everything, all the financial systems on the planet. And I think one of the biggest ones is that the system is designed to constrain the evolution of the species. And so you say to yourself, golly, in the presence of all of that kind of stuff, what might emerge that would deal with those fundamental kind of problems and give us hope and opportunity in really new ways? Well, it would be foolish to not believe that economic systems and every other system for that matter is not changeable, because everything changes and things have changed in the past. So it's really it's pretty reasonable to theorize, at least, that a new system could arise. And so I've looked around a good bit, trying to identify what kinds of new systems that there might be that would be alternatives to the capitalistic system that we understand right now. What I found was very interesting. I found that Rudolf Steiner, the extraordinary kind of medium and thinker from back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, had literally, among the many other things that he's done, had designed a whole new economic system. And Steiner essentially said, the economic system needs to be about the people, not about money, not about other kind of value. Needs to be built around individuals, around people. And he said that the domain of economics was essentially about compassionate interdependence. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. Compassionate interdependence. What it means is that the understanding, number one, is that this is not individualistic. This existence that we're in is not just one of each of us on our own, kind of fending and doing our best to not only make it through life, but also to accumulate as much stuff as we can. The emphasis is on the interdependence. What Steiner says is that in the end, we are who we are in this experience only because of the contributions of many, many other people in the system. That in fact, what we need to essentially do is realize that we're all dependent upon all of these people, and they bring such value to us that we couldn't ever bring up by ourselves. That we have compassion kind of writ large for the larger group of humanity that we live on. And so the principles and the policies that we would implement would be about this orientation to sustain and embrace and encourage this network that we're all dependent upon, and so that everybody in the network did okay. That you realized that they had this value, and therefore that the community writ large was organized such that, and in economic terms, that one of the main focuses was to assure the health and well-being of everybody in the system. What Steiner and the people who track this say is that this is the basis, this idea of compassion and interdependence is the basis. It's an architecture for social transformation. This is the kind of the framework, the platform from which you could build a new world. Now, to my way of thinking, it's self-evident that everybody isn't the same. Everybody doesn't come into this human experience with the same kind of history and background and karma, and whoever knows. And I mean, some people are good at some things, some people are not good at those things, and we all live and we get along because, some people are cab drivers and some aren't. We need cab drivers. You can't get around a big city without cab drivers. So I'm really happy for cab drivers, but I don't want to be a cab driver. I got other things I want to do. But we need them. Everybody plays, right? There's a role that we all have to play. And in this kind of new world that Steiner talks about, each person has to move past kind of an egocentric, self-interested view of the world. See how that goes back to this whole notion of a architecture for social transformation. You have to go past this point of saying that this is basic. This just flies in the face of all kind of sociology and psychology and other kind of things that say, everything you do is about self-interest, and it changes the whole notion of self-interest away from this being just myself, but myself is this extended network, this extended community that I'm all dependent upon. And what I know is that if everybody in my community feels good and everybody in the community is taken care of, there's no crime. All the kind of problems that dealt with, the suicide rates go down and everything. It turns out to be a little bit like this 1,000 years of peace thing, because nobody's fighting each other because everybody's got what they need. And, it could get there. It could work there. This could work. It says here that that Steiner said all economic activity operates on the principle of brotherhood and sisterhood, that we're all interconnected. We're all part of each other in a way. That's a real mind shift. That's a real kind of twist on the way things. Um, it's motivated by interest in others and trust in the forces of reciprocity. That's really interesting because you in a sense, you kind of hang yourself out because if you come from where we've all come from, you say, well, yeah, well, if I give all my stuff away or you take half of my income or whatever, however this gets organized, how do I know the other guy isn't going to do the same thing and I'm the one that gets hung out? You have to trust. Again, goes into this new space of seeing yourself and seeing the world in this different way that says the well-being of everybody, and we're going to trust. And there's a trust aspect to the thing. This is really deep and profound thing. This is not just about economy. It's about how the whole civilization kind of sees itself and sees its underlying organizing principles. It's a kind of fundamental orientation is how they see this. It's like a whole family or an extended family. And it arises out of the interaction of land or natural resources and labor and capital. Those are the three kind of working components of this thing. These basic elements are not commodities in and of themselves. That's another twist on the way we think. That the land is not a commodity that you can just buy or sell or other kind of things. That there is an element of commons to it. It is a contributing factor to the well-being of everyone, and so you value it. You look at it in a different way. It is not simple. Labor is not just people who work for you that generate money for you. It's a compassionate interdependence. They have lives, they have things, they got to do. There's a twist. There's a different. And the management of interdependent practices is best done through freely formed associations of producers, distributors, and consumers. What does that mean? That means is that, in practical terms, a company doesn't decide the prices of their goods. That the company gets together with their agriculture is a better example. That the distributor doesn't decide the price of corn in the supermarket or the supermarket chain. What happens is that the distributor gets together with the farmer and the consumer, and they say, what's fair? How does this work so that everybody gets taken care of? Because remember, it goes back to this interdependent, compassionate thing is how do we make the system work for everyone? Money is not a thing, but rather a multifunctional servant. Through purchases and loans and gifts, it's a servant to the circulation of value and economic activity. That's really interesting. What you see is the functional role of money, and it's not, $100 bill in your pocket or whatever you got. It is this lubrication. It's interdependent connectivity. This thing that provides the communications between the different aspects of the system, of this community, this compassionate, interdependent kind of community. And so it really kind of just moves stuff around and provides provides a lot of the interconnectivity and kind of the lubrication of the system. It is not something that is central or exclusive to the way that you'd establish value. It switches, right? It becomes like roads or infrastructure or ways that you get from one place to another, and it changes because we have this amazing kind of fixation on money where the whole system is driven by it and trying to get as much as possible, which drives all these problems, I said. Okay, so John Bloom, who is the executive director of the Anthroposophical Society in America, he's the expert on these kinds of all things Steiner. He kind of sums it up and says, such transformation requires an architecture that acknowledges that the present system, present reality, with all its flaws and greed and corruption and extreme inequity, and yet stands as a new structural system in which we can find aid and comfort and challenge and guidance, and above all, a way to live out love and forgiveness rather than power and violence. So what I've just described to you is a practical, I didn't say easy to implement, but it is a practical framework for a world where there was no war, where everybody got taken care of. And if it worked that way, it could last for 1,000 years or more. And so my question is to you, that I would ask you to think about, is how would you get from here to there? How would, remember, this is in a context of extraordinary fluidity. So you can't say, well, nobody'd ever do that, or they've never done that, or that we don't have a way to, no. Everything's up for grabs. So there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of ways to do things. And so how would you do that? What would be the practical steps going forward if you thought that this was happening? And you saw that there was a new country at the back end of this thing, and behind that was 1,000 years of peace. What would you do? What would you think about would be the next steps to building a new economy, a new way that supported these most fundamental kind of ideas, these wonderful ideas that that we all resonate with? If you found that helpful and interesting, and you haven't done so already, why don't you just click on the link below and give us your email so that we can send you alerts for the next segments of PostScript. We'd love to be able to tell you beforehand when things are coming downstream so you don't have to go look for them. And this is the best way to do that. We assure you that we won't share your information with anyone else. Thanks.